Liam Callahan didn't usually attend the parties thrown in his honor. He found them exhausting, filled with hollow compliments and the scent of old money and ambition. But that night, something tugged at him, something unexplainable, like fate whispering through the marble halls of the Callahan estate. He arrived late, dressed in a midnight black suit tailored to perfection, his blue eyes scanning the ballroom not for people, but for peace. And then he saw her. A woman standing beneath the golden chandelier, backlit by its shimmer, wearing a red silky dress that clung to her like a secret elegant, simple, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Her auburn curls fell gently down her back, and her eyes held both innocence and sorrow, like someone who knew how to dream but forgot how to believe. Evelyn had borrowed the dress from a friend, sneaking into the party under the illusion of escape, desperate for a night where she wasn't the invisible maid scrubbing floors or dusting chandeliers, just a girl, just once, in a room where no one knew her story. Their eyes met across the room like magnets defying reason, and in that moment, time forgot itself. Liam was drawn to her not with lust, but with a pull deeper, stranger, like he was trying to remember something he never lived. He didn't know her name, didn't ask, he just offered his hand, and Evelyn, heart racing, placed hers in his. They danced slowly, even as jazz trumpeted around them, their movements hushed, intimate, and unspoken, as if their bodies remembered each other from a dream neither had the courage to admit. She laughed once, softly, and Liam held onto the sound like it was gold. They slipped away to the garden under a moonlit sky where the air smelled like night roses and mist. He told her things he'd never confessed to any, about how wealth felt like a cage, about how trust had become a ghost, about the emptiness that success couldn't cure. Evelyn listened with the tenderness of someone who understood what it meant to be invisible. She didn't tell him who she was, where she worked, or why her hands were calloused. For a moment, they weren't a billionaire and a maid, they were just two broken hearts hiding in the same silence. And when their lips met, it wasn't passion that sparked, it was the ache of two people trying to forget the world, even just for a night. The kiss was gentle, desperate, searching. He held her like he didn't want morning to exist, and she let him, knowing it would be the only time. Hours slipped by in a haze of whispered confessions and soft touches that trembled with restraint, as if both knew reality would come knocking. And it did. As dawn painted the sky in soft pinks, Evelyn slipped out of his bed, leaving behind the warmth of a man she could never claim. She walked barefoot through the halls she normally cleaned, avoiding every camera, every echo of her name. Liam stirred awake to an empty room, sheets still warm but heart colder than he expected. He sat up, confused, searching for a name he never asked for, a name he suddenly craved. But she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just a haunting silence and the lingering scent of roses. To him, she was a beautiful mystery, a fantasy dipped in red silk and moonlight. To her, he was danger charming, powerful, untouchably a man who could ruin everything if he found out the truth. She returned to her maid's quarters quietly, her fingers trembling as she peeled off the dress and folded it like a memory. Every corridor she passed now held ghosts of that night. Every chandelier reminded her of how far she didn't belong. But what Liam didn't know was that she wasn't a guest. She was the woman who mopped his floors, who pressed his suits, who disappeared not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because if the truth surfaced, she'd lose everything: her job, her sister's medical insurance, her last piece of dignity. And yet, something in her heart whispered that one night had changed her. Not because it was forbidden, not because it was fleeting, but because for the first time, someone saw her, not the uniform, not the title, but her. And though Liam forgot to ask her name, his soul would remember her touch. The days that followed were wrapped in silence, the kind that gnawed at the edges of every breath Evelyn took, every corner she dusted, every step she made across the polished floors of the Callahan estate. She moved like a ghost in her own story, carefully avoiding rooms where Liam might appear, deliberately choosing the east wing when he lingered in the west, her entire existence reduced to shadows and trembling footsteps. Though her body was present, her heart remained entangled in that one forbidden night, replaying moments she was trying to forget but couldn't outrun. Each time she passed the grand staircase where they'd once locked eyes from across the ballroom, her pulse would quicken, her palms would sweat, and guilt would rise like a tide she couldn't hold back. Liam, meanwhile, buried himself in spreadsheets, mergers, and ruthless deadlines, yet even in boardrooms filled with men in designer suits and million-dollar deals, his mind drifted to a pair of eyes he couldn't place, lips he remembered but couldn't name, Something in him stirred when he walked past certain hallways or caught a faint whiff of Jasmine's gut told him he'd lost something, but he didn't know what. Evelyn kept her uniform crisp and her face unreadable, but the war inside her grew louder by the day. Every passing glance at him from a distance tore a piece of her resolve away, especially when he would pause as if sensing something familiar, then shake it off and move on. Their proximity became unbearable, a shared space filled with unsaid truths, aching silence, and a tension that thickened the air like rain before a storm. And then came that evening. The sky outside turned orange, casting gold streaks along the west hallway, where Evelyn had been ordered to deliver linens to the guest suite. She rounded the corner, not expecting him to be there, but fate had a cruel sense of timing. Liam stood in front of an oil painting, his profile bathed in sunset. The second he turned and saw her, something inside him jolted. She froze. Time didn't stop it, held its breath. "Have we met?" His voice wasn't cold, but curious, hesitant, as if tugging at a memory he couldn't reach. Her throat closed, but she forced the lie through cracked lips. "No, sir." The words nearly choked her. He tilted his head, stepping closer, blue eyes narrowing as he searched her face, and Evelyn fought the rising panic in her chest. He studied her for a second too long, lips parting slightly, like something unspoken hung in the air. She turned quickly, escaping down the hall with her heart crashing against her ribs. Liam watched her leave, unsettled. Something about her voice stirred something buried deep, and it gnawed at him the entire evening. Meanwhile, from the upper balcony, Vivian Callahan observed with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her expensive heels clicked softly against the marble as she turned and walked away, her mind already spinning new strategies. She'd seen the recognition in Liam's expression, seen the tremble in Evelyn's stance, and knew the danger of even a spark between them. She had worked far too hard to keep Liam emotionally isolated, vulnerable to her influence, and blind to people who could set his heart free. Evelyn, with her softness and secrets, was a threat Vivian couldn't afford to ignore. That night, Vivian summoned the housekeeper and demanded to know everything about the quiet one. Her suspicions confirmed, she began her subtle campaign adjusting Evelyn's schedule, changing her assignments, placing her where Liam wouldn't stumble into her again. Evelyn noticed the shifts but said nothing. She simply nodded and obeyed, tightening her grip on the last strands of the job she couldn't afford to lose. Clara's treatment still depended on her paycheck, and she'd already risked too much. But every time she walked past the West Wing, her chest tightened with memories she dared not let surface. Liam, now aware of the discomfort that lingered whenever that particular maid was near, began asking silent questions of himself. Why did her presence disrupt his focus? Why did her scent linger long after she passed? And why did it feel like he'd kissed her in another life? But he said nothing yet. Evelyn sat in the staff quarters at night, fingers tracing the rim of a chipped teacup, whispering apologies to the walls for the night she let her heart win over reason. Neither of them knew that the silence between them wasn't emptiness, it was a storm waiting to explode. And someone, somewhere, was already plotting to use it as a weapon. Rain lashed against the grand windows of the Callahan estate, casting fractured shadows across the marble floor as thunder cracked like a warning from the heavens. Liam had canceled his evening meeting due to the storm, preferring the solitude of his study where memories haunted more softly than the noise of boardrooms and backstabbing deals. He stood with a glass of untouched scotch, eyes on the fireplace, trying to find warmth not in flames but in forgotten moments. The silence was broken by a sudden, soft crash outside his door, the sound of something or someone falling. He stepped into the hallway, and there she was. Evelyn, kneeling on the floor, linen scattered, her hair wet and clinging to her face, her cheeks flushed with panic and humiliation, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Their eyes met and the air changed. It wasn't just recognition, it was detonation. His voice shot out, stunned and sharp. "You!" And hers, broken and trembling, followed like a confession unburied by time. "You're the girl from the party." Her body stiffened, heart threatening to collapse beneath the weight of being seen truly, fully seen for the first time since that night. Her lips quivered as she looked up at him, the ache of hiding unraveling all at once. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I was just pretending, just once, just to feel like someone." The hallway pulsed with truth, as if the house itself had been waiting for this reckoning. Liam stared at her, breathless, as memories flooded back the red silk dress, the way her laugh curled around his ribs, The way her touch had made him feel alive for the first time in years. The weight of reality pressed on his chest like a slow, crushing stone. Before he could speak, before he could reach out, before he could ask her anything that mattered, sharp heels clacked against marble. Vivian appeared at the far end of the hall like a shadow pulled from poison. Her smile was sugar-laced steel, her words already sharpened. "She's a liar, Liam," she spat, stepping forward, her eyes flicking to Evelyn with disgust. "A maid who snuck into your party, who thought one night would make her more than she is." Evelyn stood slowly, fighting the tremble in her knees, lips pressed into a thin, fragile line as shame and anger warred inside her. Liam's jaw clenched, but his mind spun, caught between two forces: Vivian's voice, the voice that had shaped so much of his past with twisted care, and the unspoken plea in Evelyn's eyes, begging him to see her, not judge her. "She's beneath us," Vivian added, louder now, like every word was a knife she wanted Evelyn to bleed from. "She doesn't belong in this house, let alone in your life." Liam looked between them, his cold, calculated stepmother who had raised him like a portfolio, and the girl who made him feel more in one night than all his years of wealth combined. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. The weight of judgment, expectation, and doubt pressed down harder than the storm outside. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything. I already know how this ends." And with that, she turned, walking away without waiting for permission, retreating from a man who wouldn't fight for her, from a house that never saw her as human, from a truth too fragile to survive in luxury's glare. Her shoes echoed down the corridor like a fading heartbeat. Liam didn't follow. He stood frozen in a corridor that suddenly felt colder, empty in all the places she used to fill. He didn't defend her. He didn't stop her. He let her go. Again, this time not because she disappeared, but because he let fear speak louder than love. The thunder roared above them like a judgment passed, and the silence that followed was louder than screams. The silence that followed Evelyn's departure clung to Liam like a curse, trailing him through the vast halls of the estate, whispering through the corners of his study, clinging to the linens that still faintly carried her scent. He searched every corner of the mansion, as if she might be hidden behind a forgotten door. But she was nowhere, not in the servant quarters, not in the garden, not in the places they'd never dared to share. And with each hour she remained missing, the space she left behind felt louder, more unbearable. His days blurred into restless pacing and sleepless nights, haunted by a single truth: he had let her walk away when he should have fought for her. The rooms once filled with elegance and purpose now felt like hollow cathedrals echoing with regrets. Vivian, noticing his unrest, became colder but more cunning, her voice a venomous balm pretending to soothe as she laced her warnings with lies. "She was never who you thought," she said softly one evening over dinner, slicing her lamb with surgical precision. "Girls like that don't just stumble into our world by accident. She knew who you were. She wanted something. Money, power, maybe even a name for herself." Liam didn't respond, but a part of him flinched her words, echoing insecurities he tried to silence. "You think she just happened to show up that night, looking like that?" Vivian added, her wine glass catching the chandelier's gleam. "You're not just a man, Liam. You're the Callahan heir. People will use love as a weapon to gut you." The idea festered just enough to distract him until Marcus Langley's best friend since college, and the only person he still trusted unwittingly, let truth slip through his lips. They stood outside the Callahan stables that afternoon, Liam furiously tossing a stone between his palms, eyes red with exhaustion. "She's not answering," Liam muttered. "No one's seen her. She's just gone." Marcus looked hesitant, shifting on his heels, then mumbled, "Maybe that's what Vivian wanted." Liam froze. "What do you mean?" Marcus paled, realizing his mistake. But the dam had already cracked. "She knew, man, Vivian. She knew who Evelyn was. From the beginning. She found out after the party, and she didn't just sit on it." Liam's blood ran cold. "What did she do?" Marcus exhaled sharply, guilt tightening his voice. "She threatened her. Found out about Evelyn's sister. The girl's sick. Some rare condition. She told Evelyn she'd cut off the health insurance if she didn't disappear quietly." The words hit Liam like a blade straight to the gut, each syllable carving deeper into the truth. "Why would she lie to me?" he whispered, half to himself, the other half begging the world for reason. Marcus didn't meet his eyes. "Because you're the heir. Because love makes you human. And humans make mistakes. Vivian doesn't want you to be human. She wants you to be an empire. Liam staggered back a step, breath ragged, the mansion behind him suddenly looking more like a prison than a home. All this time he thought Evelyn had chosen to leave him, that she was ashamed, afraid, or simply uninterested. But she'd left to protect her sister because his family had cornered her with cruelty. Everything inside him cracked, guilt seeping into places pride once guarded. He remembered how she trembled in that hallway, how her voice broke when she tried to explain, and how he did nothing. How he let Vivian's voice speak louder than Evelyn's tears. A storm rose in his chest, not of rage, but sorrow so thick he could barely breathe. He'd failed her not once, but twice, first by not recognizing her, and then by not defending her. He stood at the edge of the garden as rain began to fall again, softer this time, as if the sky mourned with him. The family name he once wore like armor now felt like chains. He wanted to scream, to tear through the lies, to reverse time and find her in that red dress again, before fear poisoned everything. But all he had now was an empty hallway, a voice that haunted his sleep, and the bitter taste of truth. He hadn't lost her to chance or timing. He lost her because he didn't protect what mattered most. And this time, there was no storm to blame, only himself. The days had grown colder, but it wasn't the frost in the air that sent a chill through Liam's chest as he stepped off the train into the quiet, snow-dusted town just outside Vermont. It was the uncertainty of what he would find, and whether the pieces he'd shattered could ever be made whole again. After months of searching, following the thinnest of leads and clinging to the hope that hadn't died inside him, he finally found her not in a lavish hotel or hidden behind city lights, but in a modest flower shop nestled between an old bakery and a bookstore, where wild lavender bloomed by the windowsill and the scent of rosemary lingered like a gentle reminder of peace. Through the glass, he saw her, Evelyn, wearing a pale blue apron, her hair pulled back in a messy twist, her hands arranging a bouquet with quiet focus and grace. She looked different, but somehow exactly the same, more tired perhaps, more guarded, but still carrying that quiet beauty that had once undone him with a single glance. His heart pounded as he pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming softly, and when she looked up, the world stopped. "Evelyn," he breathed, the name falling from his lips like an apology wrapped in longing. Her body stilled, the petals slipping from her hand, and she turned to face him slowly, disbelief flickering across her features. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice caught between heartbreak and restraint. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know everything. About Clara, about what Vivian did, about why you left." She didn't move, didn't speak, but the ache behind her eyes said more than words could. "You should have told me," he added, voice trembling. Her reply came like a quiet thunder. "You should have trusted me." And in that single sentence, every wall he'd built around his guilt crumbled. Silence fell again, but this time, it wasn't cold. It was full, heavy with everything unsaid. Her lips trembled, his eyes burned, and then without planning it, without thinking, they stepped into each other's gravity and met in the middle of a moment that had waited far too long. The kiss that followed didn't explode, it mended. It wasn't rushed, wasn't wild. It was soft, reverent, a slow confession pressed between mouths that still remembered. It tasted like pain and forgiveness, like hope that had waited patiently in the background. Her hands found his chest, trembling slightly, while his fingers brushed her cheek as if afraid she'd vanish again. That kiss said it all. "I see you. I missed you. I was wrong. I'm here now." They stayed like that, standing in the quiet bloom of second chances, until the bell above the door chimed again and reminded them the world hadn't stopped after all. That night, he didn't take her to a penthouse or champagne-lit suite. They walked the empty sidewalks beneath soft falling snow, hands finally entwined, sharing stories they'd never dared speak before. And later, under a wool blanket on a worn couch in her tiny studio apartment above the shop, they laid side by side in the dark, whispering not promises, but truths. No fireworks, no grand declarations. Just breath shared between two people who had already lost everything but found a way back. In the hush of the night, as her head rested on his chest and his thumb gently traced her knuckles, the rhythm of two hearts finally aligned, steady, tender, and real. The warmth of their reunion had barely settled when Liam returned to the city with a fire in his chest that had never burned so clear. No longer the fire of ambition or reputation, but of truth and redemption. He stepped into the Callahan boardroom, not as the heir of an empire, but as a man who had finally seen what mattered beyond power. The mahogany table stretched before him, surrounded by men in tailored suits and carefully masked expressions. And at the head sat Vivian, composed, poised, but not prepared for what was coming. Liam's voice cut through the still air like a blade. Calm, precise, devastating. He laid out every truth she had buried: her manipulation of Evelyn, the cruel leverage over Clara's illness, the lies spun like silk to keep him tethered to a world he now wanted nothing from. The board listened in stunned silence as each secret unraveled, the polished image of Vivian Callahan slowly collapsing under the weight of exposure. Her smile cracked, her eyes narrowed, but Liam didn't flinch. "You used fear to build this legacy," he said, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "But I won't be another name carved into that marble wall of silence and obedience. I don't want money built on control. I want a life built on love." With that, he slid the resignation letter across the table, turned his back to the empire that had shaped but never fulfilled him, and walked out not as a fallen heir, but as a man finally free. Days later, the mansion he once called home stood empty, its chandeliers dim, its echoing halls no longer his prison. He sold it without a backward glance, using the funds not for luxury, but to create something new, something honest. A small, sunlit home tucked in the countryside became his refuge, a place where mornings smelled like fresh bread and wildflowers, where Evelyn could breathe without fear and Clara could laugh in peace. He built a center in Clara's Namahaven for girls like Evelyn, those often unseen, unheard, underestimated. Inside its walls, stories unfolded on canvases, journals, and small performances. It became a sanctuary for second chances. Meanwhile, Evelyn found her voice again, not in whispers, but in color. She began to paint the moments that had once broken her: the night of the red dress, the hallway where truth was silenced, the look in Liam's eyes when he finally chose her over legacy. Her hands no longer trembled as they held the brush. Her smile returned not wide or loud, but soft and unshakably certain. In the small art studio behind their home, her latest canvas sat glowing under warm light. Painted in soft hues of midnight and sunrise, it held golden letters that shimmered against a background of lavender and storm blue. And those words said everything she had never spoken aloud, everything her soul had whispered from the very beginning. "You were never just a maid. You were the missing chapter of my soul." It hung above their fireplace, not as a decoration, but as a testimony of pain survived, love chosen, and a life rewritten on their terms. The scent of spring drifted through the countryside like a soft promise, weaving between the orchard's gentle breeze and the hush of a day long waited for. Under a canopy of blooming cherry blossoms, where petals floated down like blessings from above, Evelyn stood in a simple, ivory gown, nothing extravagant, nothing borrowed from anyone else's dream-just fabric that moved like breath and eyes that shimmered with quiet joy. Clara, now stronger, her laughter blooming like the flowers she once watched from hospital beds, tossed pink petals into the air, each one a symbol of survival, of hope reclaimed, of the little sister who finally saw her hero find happiness. The gathering was small, only the ones who mattered. No ballroom, no press, just soil beneath their feet, sunlight warming their skin, and hearts that had healed beside one another. Marcus stood with the ring, no longer the reckless friend who once echoed the doubts of others, but a man who had chosen truth, who had made amends, who now smiled with pride as he passed Liam the gold band that glinted not with wealth, but with meaning. Evelyn looked up at Liam, her hands trembling slightly in his, and in that moment he leaned in, not to kiss her yet, but to whisper against her skin, voice raw with reverence, "You were never beneath me. You were always above my fears." And in her eyes, he saw the full circle of pain and strength, of everything they'd endured and everything they now stood upon. Their vows didn't echo. They didn't need microphones or applause. They were spoken in tones only the heart could hear, sacred, steady, and steadying. She promised not perfection, but presence. He vowed not rescue, but respect. The world had tried to break them apart with status, with secrets, with scars, but love had not shouted. It had stayed. Through silence, through shame, through distance and discovery, it had held its breath and waited. And now, in this orchard beneath a sky that finally felt like theirs, it exhaled. They exchanged rings under the soft flutter of petals and held hands like lifelines. And when the kiss came, it wasn't the kind you find in movies. It was slower, deeper, made of everything they had once lost and now reclaimed. The pain didn't vanish. The betrayal wasn't forgotten. The wounds had not disappeared, they had simply found peace within the truth that love, when it's real, doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. Around them, laughter rose like music, not loud or wild, but warm and close. Clara clapped with tearful eyes, and Marcus toasted with a grin that no longer carried guilt. And Evelyn, resting her head on Liam's shoulder later that evening, as lanterns swayed in the trees, whispered, "I would still choose you, even if I had to live it all over again." To which he answered, "Then I'd lose you 1,000 times just to find you once." The night fell gently, and in the hush between stars and promises, their story once born in shadow blossomed fully in the light. A tale that began with a stolen dance, with a red silk dress and a mistake they'd never planned, now ended in stillness, in vows wrapped around their scars, in a forever that didn't need to be loud to be true.